And hello again from Fox News in Washington. Well, it's not just barbecue on the menu this Memorial Day weekend. There's also politics and national security. We begin with former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, who ran second for the GOP presidential nomination in 2008, became a star on Fox News Channel, but then left television to run again. Governor Huckabee joins us now, and welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be back.
I want to start with a couple of breaking stories. First of all, the release on Friday by the State Department of 296 of Hillary Clinton's emails concerning Benghazi. Here's the reaction that you gave. We expect these charades and masquerades in USSR, that's the old Soviet Union, not the U.S. Governor, explain what you mean by that.
Well, the secrecy with which this government has operated, and specifically Hillary Clinton using a private email server outside the bounds of normal State Department protocol, is very troubling, especially because we have yet to get an answer to what happened in Benghazi. And while I know that that sounds like something, an old broken record, we need to know, why did 4 different times an ambassador call for help and no help came? The one thing American soldiers and American diplomats need to know, wherever they're stationed across the world, is when they're under fire and being shot at, we will move heaven and earth to try to get to them, to rescue them, and to protect them. And we didn't do that on the night of Benghazi. Hillary's phone rang at 3 in the morning, and she let it go to voicemail. We need to know why.
Let me ask you about another breaking question. Congress is more deadlocked than ever about what to do about the NSA's bulk data collection of phone records with the program set to expire on June 1st. Here's what you had to say about that this week.
Does the Constitution allow the government to read the mail and to listen to the phone calls, even to collect them without a warrant or probable cause? And I think the obvious answer is no, it does not.
A couple of points here, Governor. First of all, Section 215 of the Patriot Act, which is the section that is going to expire on June 1st, has nothing to do with listening in on phone calls. It's just recording the fact that my phone number called your phone number. So aren't you wrong there when you talk about listening in? And secondly, what would you do? What do you think we need to do about this bulk data collection?
Well, I think the Constitution already provides what we should do. If you have probable cause to suspect that Chris Wallace is acting in some nefarious manner, you go to a judge, you get a warrant, and then you listen in on his calls, because now you've got the other branch of government that's constitutionally required to be a part of that process. You don't just give the executive branch unlimited resources, unlimited power. Our founders were very concerned about too much power being invested in any one, in any branch. The balance of power is fundamental to our system. And I don't want to be made unsafe, but Chris, 225 different terrorist plots over the past years since 9/11, and so far not one of them has been tied directly to the NSA's collection of metadata. So if this is so effective, how come it hasn't resulted in the foiled terrorist plots? Those have been foiled by old-fashioned good police work, old-fashioned human intelligence. It seems like we're spending billions of dollars on the whiz-bang technology and not enough money on human resources, which really is proven to be the most effective way of stopping terrorism.
All right, let's turn now to your candidacy. You announced it about 3 weeks ago, and I was struck listening to your campaign announcement. You laid out some very bold policies, and I want to drill down into those. You said, first of all, no cuts, no changes to Medicare or Social Security. Here you are.
If Congress wants to take away someone's retirement, let them end their own congressional pensions, not your Social Security.
But government trustees say without any changes, for instance, Medicare's hospital insurance fund will run out of money by 2030, and the Social Security Trust Fund will run out of money by 2033. Governor, don't we have to find some way, either raising the eligibility age or cutting benefits perhaps for the wealthier people, to try to keep these programs solvent? Not saying for current retirees, but for people, a lot of reformers say 55 and younger.
Well, but the problem with people even 55 and younger, they've been paying in for 40 years. This was not a voluntary extraction from their paycheck. It was involuntarily lifted from them under the guise that the government would then provide for them their money back in that Social Security or Medicare fund. This is not an entitlement as much as it is an earned benefit that people have paid in. Now, there's some factors here. One of the reasons, Chris, that I'm for the fair tax is that it means that everybody will help fund Social Security and Medicare, not just the working people of America. Because right now, the only people paying in are the people who work for wages. People who get their money off dividends, they're not paying anything in. So the Social Security and Medicare funds are being somewhat short-shrifted because we limit the manner in which people pay in. If everybody was under a consumption tax, which is what the fair tax does, all of Americans would be contributing, even people who make their money solely off
Sir, I'm going to get to the fair tax in a minute, but I want to just stay on this entitlement reform, because back in 2011, here's what you told Neil Cavuto about reform of entitlements.
We keep saying that, 60 is the new 40. Okay. Well, let's treat 60 like it's the new 40. Let's raise that eligibility age up to 70 for the people under 55.
You favored reforms to entitlements back then, sir. What's changed?
Well, the main thing I feel like that has happened is, as I understand, if we start breaking promises to people and we start making changes in a program that people have been into for years, I think it adds to the distrust we have of government. And frankly, there's never been a time in my lifetime when people are more distrustful of government. Now, if we want to make those changes, I'd say go back to people who are 14 and 15 who are just entering the workforce. And here's another suggestion
but, sir,
that I have.
If I may briefly, it was only 4 years ago you were saying, yeah, we do need to change it for people who are 55 and younger because, frankly, people are living longer.
And I think the fact is that we can't make those changes because, as I talk to people across the country, they feel like that is a gut punch. And if we're going to make the changes, look, let the individual, for example, if you want to give me the option to take my retirement benefits in one lump sum, but to let me make that choice, okay, give me the tax-free benefits. But I don't think you can go and give seniors this sense that everything that they have been involuntarily paying in for is now going to be taken from them.
Okay, let's talk about the fair tax, which you just brought up. You want to abolish the income tax, you want to abolish the IRS and create a fair tax, which, as you say, is a national sales tax. But critics say the problem with that is it's too regressive. The Tax Policy Center said this, that the average rate for the lowest income group would exceed 33%, while the average for the top group would fall to less than 16%. The argument, Governor, is that the rich who spend less of their income are going to end up making out pretty well under this, and the poor who spend almost all of their income and are going to be paying this sales tax are going to end up paying the most, or at least the highest percentage.
They have it exactly wrong. In fact, it's the bottom third of the economy who benefit the most from the fair tax, and the people at the top third of the economy benefit the least, although everybody benefits some. That tax study is one that has been discredited by the people who spent over $20 million of very thorough, thoughtful economic study developing the fair tax. It's not just some political idea.
But sir, doesn't it just stand to reason that if I make
economic plan?
Doesn't it just stand to reason that if I make $5,000, I'm going to spend a higher percentage of my income just for the necessities, and if I make $1 million, I probably am not going to spend as much of a percentage of my income because I've got a lot of income?
Well, the difference is, though, and this is where a lot of people don't understand, the fair tax has what's called a prebate, which untaxes people for their necessities. So if you're at the bottom third of the economy, chances are you really don't pay any effective tax whatsoever in the consumption tax because you're consuming less and you're getting a prebate, which is a rebate in advance for that which you would have spent. So that's why the poorest people end up coming out better. I would recommend people going to the fair tax website, reading the books on the fair tax, but getting it from people who actually know what it does rather than those who don't want to see the fair tax, because I'll tell you what the fair tax does. It empowers the consumer, and it lets people have their whole paycheck, and it takes the power out of the hands of Congress and puts it in the hands of the consumer. That's power to the people.
Governor, I want to keep moving along because, as I say, there were a lot of things you said in your announcement. You also seem to indicate that as president, you wouldn't necessarily obey court rulings, even the Supreme Court. Here you are.
Many of our politicians have surrendered to the false god of judicial supremacy, which would allow black-robed and unelected judges the power to make law as well as enforce it.
But, Governor, we have operated under the principle of judicial review since the Marbury versus Madison case in 1803.
Judicial review is exactly what we've operated under. We have not operated under judicial supremacy. Presidents Lincoln, Jefferson, Jackson, presidents have understood that the Supreme Court cannot make a law. They cannot make it. The legislature has to make it. The executive branch has to sign it and enforce it. And the notion that the Supreme Court comes up with a ruling and that automatically subjects the two other branches to following it defies everything there is about the three equal branches of government. Chris, the Supreme Court is not the supreme branch, and for God's sake, it isn't the supreme being.
But sir,
it is the Supreme Court.
But sir, George Will, the conservative columnist, has pointed out that back in 1957, another governor of Arkansas, Orville Faubus, decided to disregard and refused to obey the Supreme Court's ruling to desegregate schools. President Eisenhower had to call in the 101st Airborne. Are you saying that President Huckabee might decide he wasn't going to obey the ruling on desegregation, or like President Nixon to turn over the tapes, that, you know, it's up in the air as to whether you're going to obey the Supreme Court?
Well, Chris, as you know, George Will is no fan of mine. He's not very fond of me. He recently called me appalling. So I'm not surprised that he would make such a false comparison. But the point is, in that case, the Supreme Court had ruled, the legislature and the executive branch had agreed with the Supreme Court, and precisely what happened is what should happen. The president ordered the airborne to come in and enforce the law that did exist. But it wasn't that the president defied the law. The president was carrying out the law and using all the forces at his resource to do it.
But okay, let's say the president decided, I don't like the Supreme Court's ruling on that. Let's say Nixon had said, for instance, in Watergate, I don't want to turn over the tapes and the court can't make me.
Well, the president still has to follow whatever the law is. Does Congress have a law that tells him what he's going to do? In that case, the Congress was ready to impeach Nixon, and he ultimately resigned. I want to get back to the main point here. It's a matter of balance of power. If the Supreme Court could just make a ruling and everybody has to bow down and fall on their faces and worship that law that isn't a law because it hasn't been yet passed, then what if the Supreme Court ruled that they were going to make the decision as to who was going to be the next president and save the taxpayers and the voters from all the expense and trouble of voting, and they'll just pick a president? Well, we would say, well, they can't do that. Why can't they do it? They can't do it because it's not in the law. We are sworn to uphold the Constitution and the law, and it has to be consistent and agreed upon with three branches of government. One can't overrule the other two. That's all I'm saying. We learned that in ninth grade civics, but I'm convinced a lot of Ivy League law schools must have forgotten that simple basic civics lesson along the way.
Governor Huckabee, as I said, an awful lot of interesting things you said in your announcement. I'm sure a lot of interesting things you're going to say in this campaign. Thank you for coming in today. Thank you for sharing your holiday weekend with us. We'll see you on the campaign trail, and we'll keep asking you questions.
All right, Chris. Thanks.